For our opening introduction to the poetry unit, I chose My Papa's Waltz by Theodore Rothke. I chose this poem because it's a small poem in terms of size, but it's filled with a lot of ambiguity to show you that, and as we talked about before, that literature is very subjective, and the reader can take and apply different meanings, get different reads from the poem. And so while we're reading, I want you to pay attention to a couple of things. I want you to try to figure out what you think the title means or what it's relating to, the rhyme scheme and the rhyme patterns, any figurative language that you see in the poem, who is speaking, and what is the tone or the author's attitude towards the subject. So let's just read it and then we'll start kind of talking about it. So, the whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. We romped until the pan slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. At every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt, then waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. So before we break down any specifics, the poem itself has, in pattern, has 4 stanzas of 4 lines each. It has an A-B rhyme scheme, and just to kind of explain what that means, the end rhymes of every line are assigned a rhyme line, a lowercase letter that represents the rhyme sound. So breath would be the first rhyme sound, and we would make that an A. And then dizzy doesn't sound like breath, so it needs its own rhyme sound, which is going to be B. But here we have death, which sounds like breath, so this becomes an A. And then easy is a slant rhyme. It's not exactly like dizzy, but it's a slant rhyme, so it counts in the grand scheme. So we would assign that B. And so if you were to go down through the rest of the poem, you would see that this rhyme scheme continues. It's going to go, the next one will be Pan's shelf countenance, which is a slant for Pan's unfrown itself. So that would be CD, CD. Wrist, knuckle, miss, buckle would be EF, EF. And then head, dirt, bed, shirt, or GH, GH. So that's how we assign rhyme. This rhyme scheme has 3 stressed syllables. 3 stressed syllables in each line. So there are 3 beats in a waltz. I don't know if you are familiar with ballroom dancing, but the waltz pattern is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And it's the same with our poem. It has the 3 stressed syllable line. So the rhyme itself reminds us of this dance, the waltz, which is a very flowing and graceful dance. Okay, so keep all of that in your head while we start to discuss it. Okay, so the whiskey on your breath in the first line automatically puts our guard up a little bit, because at first glance and maybe at first read, you can see that this is clearly a little boy who is dancing with his father across the kitchen, and that it's a remembering of this dance in the kitchen. Or is it a dance? That's what we're going to talk about in just a second. It has a very playful and light tone. You've got I hung on, we romped, my right ear. Oh, no, I'm sorry. You beat time on my head. You waltz me off to bed. It has a very playful and light tone, which distracts you at first from what could be just really rather disturbing content. Um, Going back really quick, these short lines remind us of like childhood poems because they're easy to remember. Short lines, you've got 4 line stanzas, very short. The big words in the poem, like countenance, um, remind us that this poem was not written. It's not a boy's poem, a child's poem. It is an older man who is looking back on an event that happened in his childhood. If it was a child's poem, we wouldn't have those countenance. We wouldn't have unfrown. The fact of the waltz itself, a child doesn't know that a dance or a little romp around the kitchen is a waltz. So it's clearly an older man who is revisiting an event from his childhood. All right, so breaking it down, the whiskey, we talked about the whiskey already being kind of like, upon a second reading, being a little bit alarming. So we know that Dad has been drinking or maybe drunk. And it's so strong actually that it's making the child that is clinging to his pants legs dizzy. So he's been drinking for a while. It might be a common occurrence. Otherwise, the child wouldn't be dancing with him if he was, or maybe the child didn't realize that that's what it is. That's that childlike perspective. So, could make a small boy dizzy. I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. We romped until the pan slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance, that's her face, facial expressions, could not unfrown itself. So Mom is watching. She's frowning, upset. And it's not a waltz here. They're romping so hard that pans are coming off of the shelves. So they're hitting against things. And knocking things off of shelves. The hand that held my wrist. Okay, so backing up to the waltz. In a waltz, there's no wrist holding. It's shoulder and hand around the back for the woman, same for the man. You don't grab onto somebody's wrist to dance with them. So just keep an eye on that for just a second. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. That's indicative of fighting. It's indicative of punching it against the wall. Your knuckles don't usually get battered under normal use. The top of your hand rarely sees any action unless it's clenched in a fist so that it becomes the outside shell of your hand. At every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. So the child is getting battered from this experience as well. It's very rough. It's a romp. Pans are flying off the shelf. Mom is frowning, upset. Dad's drunk. He's stumbling around. He's gripped his child by the wrist. Every time he missteps, the child's ear scrapes against his belt buckle, causing some kind of discomfort. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt. So again, reference to a physical discomfort, some kind of pain. Dad is drunk. He is dancing, romping around. He's beating time on his head to the music. if there's music, and then waltz me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. Okay, so this playful and light tone is actually distracting us, the reader, from something rather disturbing. Let's look first. There is one simile in the entire poem here in this line, but I hung on like death. This one simile in the entire poem, it could mean holding on very tightly, but it also could add a darker tone to the poem. So let's take a look at what this could be. So Dad is fiercely waltzing, romping, actually. He's holding him roughly. He's beating time on his head. Is this a poem about a rough, simple, hard-working man, loves his son, but likes to drink, enjoying just some quality time in a very clumsy manner? Or is this dance not a dance at all? Is it a drunkard who is actually physically abusing his son, but the child's remembrance of it is very different? It might have been commonplace for Dad to beat and romp him around a room, abusing him, and he is in his childlike view, but as a man he's able to look back on it. It's very ambiguous. The mother doesn't make it any clearer. She's frowning. Her face could not unfrown itself. So is Mom frowning because they're knocking stuff off the shelves, being silly in their romp, or is Mom frowning because and upset because Dad is abusing child and bashing and destructing, like literally causing destruction in the kitchen because of it? There's a lot of words that have ambiguous meanings. You beat time on my head. Are we talking about the beat of the music? Or is it physical beating? The belt buckle is mentioned. The belt buckle. I realized that was a lot to unpack, and I chose it purposefully so that you could see that there's so much meaning that you can pack into poetry, stories, literature. It's the reading of it, which is important. You putting your knowledge and your perspectives and your viewpoint in to make thoughtful analysis of what's happening. You can read this and feel like the first person who is, this is Dad. He likes to drink a little bit, but he loves his son. He works all the time. That's why his knuckles are all battered from working so hard. His rough hand, his palm caked hard by dirt. Spending what little time he has with his son, that he can. Or are you the other reader who sees the darker side of the poem, the possible abuse, the beating, the physicality of it? So it's all up to your reader's perspective.